There's a strange contradiction about the internet right now. It's never been more active. There's more content, more engagement, more people online at once than ever before. Something is always happening. And yet, when a lot of people log off, they describe the same feeling. Not boredom, not anger, just a sense that something isn't really there anymore. At first, I didn't think much of that. It's easy to blame nostalgia or attention spans over the idea that everything eventually feels worse once you've seen enough of it. The internet has always been messy. It's always been full of spam, automation, and strange corners, so none of that felt new. But what made this harder to ignore was how often the same questions kept coming up in completely different places from people who weren't connected to each other. Why does so much of this feel repetitive? Why do conversations feel flatter than they used to? Why does everything look busy but feel kind of empty? For a while, I assumed that this was cost of scale. Most people means more noise. But at some point, the question started to change. People stopped asking whether the internet was getting worse and started asking whether it was still being shaped by primarily people at all. That's where much content is generated, ranked, filtered, and amplified without human input. It stops feeling like a quality problem. It starts feeling like a design problem. Eventually, people give the feeling a name. They started calling it the dead internet theory. The idea itself isn't complicated. It suggests that much of what we see online today isn't driven by real people, but by automation, AI, and systems designed to stimulate engagement. According to the theory, the internet only appears active, taken literally. That sounds extreme, and honestly, it probably is. People have always gravitated how alive the internet used to be. Nostalgia smooths over a lot of the noise. The early web isn't some perfect human space. It was chaotic, spam-filled, full repetition, low-effort posts, and people copying each other constantly. Repetition isn't new. Memes aren't new. Trend chasing isn't new. Humans have always copied what worked. So this isn't about the internet secretly died overnight. It doesn't mean every comment you see is artificial, but even accounting for all that, there's still something people keep noticing. Not a collapse, not a takeover, but a subtle shift in how things feel. What's interesting isn't whether the theory is true, it's why so many people immediately recognize the feeling behind it. The theory didn't create discomfort, it gave it a label. One thing that often gets overlooked is that the internet has always been purely human from the very beginning. There were systems moving through it that weren't people. Search engines crawled pages automatically, spam bots filled inboxes, scripts posted on forums, viruses and worms spread on their own. None of this was hidden. Automation wasn't a secret. It was just part of the background. But the systems had boundaries. They didn't hold conversations. They didn't blend into communities. They didn't shape culture, movement to movement. What changed wasn't automation itself. What changed was how decisions started getting made. Modern platforms don't understand meaning. They don't understand truth. They don't understand intention. They understand signals, clicks, watch time, replies, how fast something spreads. If a post gets interacted with, it's shown more. If it's ignored, it disappears. That's it. The system doesn't ask something is engaging, it just notices that it is. Content that's fast performs better than the content that's thoughtful. Content that is familiar performs better than content that's experimental. Content that repeats known formats performs better than the content that takes risk. People that feel the pressure, even if they constantly think about it, creators start adapting without realizing that they're adapting. They post more often, they simplify ideas, they stick to patterns they already know that work. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because the system rewards survival behavior. Slowly thinking doesn't perform well. Hesitation doesn't perform well. Silence doesn't perform well. So gradually, human behavior starts to resemble automation. Once that happens, the line starts to blur. If automation has always existed, and the people are starting to question it recently, then maybe what's changed isn't the presence of machines. It's how close they are, how much space is occupied, and how often is no longer obvious when they're interacting with one in the hall. This is where AI enters the picture, not as the cause, but as an accelerant. AI didn't invent these systems, it fits into them perfectly, because AI produces exactly where the system rewards consistency, volume, predictability, and speed. When machines started generating text, images, and voices that felt human enough, they exposed something uncomfortable. The system didn't care where the content came from. It never had. It only cared that it behaved correctly. The infrastructure didn't change. The incentives didn't change. AI just removed the last assumption, that content required a person behind it. The dead internet theory didn't come from intuitions or research labs. It came from forums, from people comparing notes, comment sections that felt strangely repetitive, accounts that never seemed to sleep, replies that sounded human but didn't behave the way humans usually do. These weren't proofs, these weren't patterns. What people usually notice first isn't bots, it's tone. Conversations that looped instead of involve, replies that respond to keywords instead of ideas, engagements that feel technically correct but emotionally hollow. Nothing breaks, nothing crashes. Things just feel thinner, less friction, less surprise, less presence. And because nothing dramatic happens, it's easy to dismiss until you notice it everywhere. There are measurable changes. Automatic traffic makes up a mass amount of portion of the web. Large amounts of content are generated and scaled artificially. Algorithms amplify whatever keeps people engaged, regardless of origin. But none of this proves the internet is dead. What it suggests is something quieter and more unsettling. The system doesn't care who creates content, it cares how it behaves. It doesn't ask whether the system is meaningful, it asks whether it performs. Timing, interaction, output. Whether these signals come from a human or a machine doesn't really matter. The consequence isn't that the internet is fake, it's that the meaning becomes harder to hold on to. Creativity becomes riskier, originality feels inefficient, sameness feels safer. Trust erodes quietly, not because everything is false, and because harder to know what deserves attention, and identified to start to feel less anchored. When presence can be stimulated, being present stops feeling special. You don't disappear, you just feel less central. So no, the internet isn't dead, but it is changing. It's becoming a place where humans is no longer the default. Participation is optional, content is infinite, presence can be stimulated. AI didn't create this situation, it revealed it. The infrastructure didn't change, the incentives didn't change. AI just made the boundary visible. The dead internet theory might get the wrong diagnosis. It's responding to something real. A space once reflected human messiness is now optimized for performance. And the performance doesn't pause, it doesn't wonder, it doesn't remember to intention. Once behavior matters more than meaning, the internet starts to feel very different. And once you notice that, it's hard to unsee it.